Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We got the one and only Miss Adrian Shapiro in the house, and she's going to be our presenter today. Hi, Miss Adrian. How are you?
Hi, everybody. Happy belated V-Day, I guess.
Yes. Happy Saturday, everybody. So, Miss Adrian, we are in your hands.
Okay, so I want to thank you for choosing to spend some time with us, or whether it be later watching a recording or right here on this beautiful, well, it's beautiful here in Southern California, Saturday. All right, so we're going to talk about advocacy today. And uh, our topic, it really is about choosing an advocate, right? That's really what we're going to be honing in on. But in order to do that, there's a lot of information and a lot of things we need to know that fills into that thing, that whole process. All right. So choosing an advocate. Let's get started. So here's our agenda. We're going to talk about what is advocacy, why advocacy is important, how to choose an advocate, and then what is a point of care advocacy, which is a specific type of advocacy that we at Access at Access, so many advocacies, we at Access actually do training in, and it's a program that we feel is very, very much needed in not just the sickle community, but in all people need to have training and understanding of what and a skill set and be present when they or their loved one is at any point receiving interfacing with the care community. Then we're going to talk a little bit about patient zero because it was where we learned a lot, and I think understanding the source of how we got to this and determine what was important um, is really good to share. A lot of times people come and they're like, well, we just know or we just do. And so much of what happens in the sickle world is that lived experience, right? What it is we have learned after years and years and years of living with this disease. And then we'll talk about lessons learned. We've got some questions we want to ask you and have a discussion. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how um, there's so much, um, I don't want to say confusion, but there is so much going on now of unknowns because we've had this shift in policy. We've had a shift in for the first time, not just a shift in our leadership, but a shift in our leadership that's going to cause changes in all of those federal agencies that for so long, most of the time remained pretty steady, that we as people using, living and using a lot of the services that have been outlined here and protections, they're a little bit up in the air now. So we're going to talk about that. And we're going to talk about that and how that um, increases the need for advocates. And then we'll have time for your comments or questions. And I guess comments, tech team, check me if I'm wrong. Comments come in through the comment section. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. And we're going to put it on the screen for you so that you don't have to look for them. We'll pop it on the screen for you.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, so
Yes, ma'am.
let's get started. Okay. So, what does advocacy mean to you? Now, advocacy is really interesting. Depending on well, how old you are, where you live in the country, where you live in the world, advocacy um, has has a different meaning, but ultimately, um, um, no matter what our personal kind of experience with it, ultimately we think of advocacy as something that a person feels internally, right? A belief, um, a change, a need, right? Where that person finds a voice and uses their voice, right, to affect change, to make something happen. Oops, my little fingers. So advocacy, according to the um, I forget which one dictionary we took it from. Google. Oh, I'm sorry. It's the Merriam-Webster. Sorry. My brain was in another place. Okay, so the noun, it's the act or process of supporting a cause. Now, this is really important. Listen, a cause, an individual, or a proposal. So it is something that we have agreed that there is a big thing, right? Um, there is also for um, an individual, so that one-on-one, and then a proposal, which is a concept, right? That we feel an individual feels is worthy of putting their attention and their resources, so their time, their money, their health sometimes, all of this, uh, devoting that to making something happen. So that won't be happen for an individual, for a cause, or for a proposal. And sometimes those are all mixed together. So, so what then from that you take it is, what is a patient advocate? I feel like I went too fast. So again, remember it says that uh, you can an advocate, right, or advocacy can happen at an individual, as a cause, or a proposal. So here we are looking at those areas and turning that lens on patients. So a person, what is a patient advocate? So a person who helps kind of to guide a patient through the healthcare system, right? And that means going through all sorts of things, not just when they're in the hospital, but screening, a diagnosis, treatment, follow up, a medical condition. And here we have, here as an example, is cancer. But uh, again, helping that patient communicate and make decisions about their health care. So patient advocates also help patients set up appointments or doctor visits or medical tests with insurance companies, employers, case managers, lawyers, and others who may have an effect on the patient's healthcare needs. And sometimes they're also called patient navigators, right? So this is the formal landscape definition of what a patient advocate does, all right? So there's a lot in here. And so what uh, we want, again, giving you the big picture. This is what they do. They can be involved in all of these areas of patient treatment. And it really was the National Cancer Institute who really pushed forward this concept of a patient advocate, as opposed to a peer support or just family support, but more formalizing this. And that was due to the nature of cancer treatment. Shoot, I am going back. Okay, good. And then, so we take a step back from that. We say, well, when did advocacy make a difference? All right. So, advocacy made a difference in some really big ways and really big things. So, for example, advocacy made a difference in ending slavery, right? In ending Jim Crow laws, um, in ending the Vietnam War. Um, I know that many of you who are listening to this may be too young to even understand um, the importance of advocacy when it came to the Vietnam War, right? So it really was the first war in America that was ended not just by defeat or winning, right, the war or it being over, but by people taking to the streets and saying, no, what we are doing as a country is wrong. We are not going to support it. So it was that thing that went from an individual stand up to a cause, right, which was to stop the war, and ultimately the policy of saying, basically, there are things that need to be in place in order for our country to be involved in an actual war. The AIDS research and treatment was another one of those things. Um, it um, Initially with AIDS, there was so much death happening and so much judgment and bias uh, in the healthcare system, in the national news, and just in general, and in the culture. And so it took these individuals who were coming, many of them from I'm going to say a privilege, right? A privilege status, to say, no, we must stop this. You must treat these people humanely. You must stop slandering them because of their sexual preferences. I remember when uh, AIDS was really, really hit, and because we use Cedars, which is in West Hollywood, the West Hollywood Beverly Hills adjacent, being in Peds, and I would walk over the bridge and go in the HEMOC, and I would see they had trays of food waiting out in the hallways because the servers would refuse to take the food into the rooms, right? And just the devastation of all of these, at this point, really young men who just were left dying and really, really, um, um, I'm going to say, an abandonment. And I remember thinking, oh my God, this must be what my great grandmother talked about, right? Where people would go to a hospital and be refused treatment. And this must be what it was like as I'd see those mothers and partners crying in the hallway and asking for help. And at this point, my daughter was in pediatrics, and most sickle patients were in pediatrics. So um, we didn't see many of the things that we're seeing now that our adults are facing. But it was just amazing to me that in a place where they had everything everybody needed, to the degree to feeding people, making them comfortable, that was being refused and was okay. And it was only through that AIDS movement, who used the playbook from both um, the Vietnam War to um, um, to get the attention, that whole disruption, right? So prior to this, those sorts of things have been handled in pretty calm, I'm going to say calm ways. But with AIDS, they really came out. I'm sorry, with the Vietnam War, they stopped traffic. They They had marches on bridges. They disrupted things. And so the AIDS community took that playbook and took it and focused it really into healthcare, right? And what was happening and why we needed research and why we needed things. So again, changing. So going from individuals to a cause to actually causing policy changes. The drunk driving laws, and that came about from mothers. I can relate to that. MADS was Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And again, it was pain that many people had um, witnessed. How many, right? How many of us know people who were involved in car wrecks and things like that from people who were driving after drinking? And these mothers got together and said, this is crazy. And once they got enough information and pulled it together, and they organized, right? And they again went to legislators and they went to insurance companies. They went everywhere they could, and they would show up talking about their experience and asking why, and putting the people who make the decisions um, in position where they had to be supportive or come out as to why they couldn't, and again change policy forever. um, so um, Advocacy has had like really an effect for reaching all of our lives here in America and in other countries too. We're just going to stick with America, but really where it's changed our lives. And most of the time, that's been for the better. So, um, what? And so that's how we're going to be addressing it today, right? It's an avenue we can use to change our laws and systems for the better. Okay. So, if in fact we talked about what it was a health advocate does. So they're kind of involved in your life. You're opening your life up to them. You're trusting them. So here is kind of the definition of what you should be looking at for a good health advocate. And that's somebody who knows you well and is calm. They're organized. They're assertive and comfortable with asking questions, meaning um, a lot of this is, are they good communicators? The most important thing is to choose someone you respect and can trust to be both discreet and caring. A good advocates must be well informed and knowledgeable about standard of care when you have a specialized condition or you are going through some sort of specialized a need for specialized services under some category. Maybe it's a surgery, maybe it's a genetic illness. And they also need to be resourceful. They need to be able to think inside the box and outside the box. They need to be able to think about the past, what the present, and also they need to be thinking forward. So it's someone really who is, I think, very, very stable and well-rounded. So once you find this person, what happens is you form a partnership, right? So together you do this. This healthcare advocate comes to you with a certain set of skills. You have a certain set of needs, right? And so, um, how do you form that partnership, right? So you have to clearly explain the kind of help or what you need and your concerns. You have to be willing and trusting enough of them to provide the details of your medical history. And so you may even want to give them access to your medical records, electronic medical records, so that they can do any research, review any notes. They can know things, right? Like about if you need refills and things like that. But all of the things that while you are unwell, and even maybe when you are in a state where you're not that unwell, but can help you to keep things moving smoothly. All right. They need to take notes. So you always ask them to take notes. And so what happens here is sometimes with your advocate, you're having to repeat yourself. But until they can get those notes down succinctly, they are not then able to really support you consistently. Okay. And you want to make sure that you give your advocate your contact information, right, to your healthcare team. So you need to know if you're hospitalized, what room you're in. You need to know if you are working with a community-based organization already and you have a community health worker. They need to know if you have a care manager, anybody that you're working on your team, right? They need to have their information, and you also need to give those people permission to speak with them. It's very, very important that you empower your advocate so that they are able to assist you, and then you can then concentrate more on getting well, right? Using your resources for getting well. So in the hospital, you can say, well, I have a case manager in my hospital. The hospital has a health, an advocate, patient advocate. I may have a community health worker, all of that. But if you're getting a healthcare advocate that's working for you, that they're just concentrating on you right then, right there to take care of your needs. So that's something to think about when choosing who it is that you select to be. You can't have a ton of advocates. Generally, an advocate will be working. You'll have a lead advocate who's just like your person, and they will be depending on other resources or bringing other people in if they need to. Okay. The advocate also must be consistent, right? That's the other thing. Okay. So, did I go backwards? Case, did I go backwards? All right. So, when you go to choosing your health care, I'm sorry. I think I went backwards.
Yes,
I went backwards. Sorry, guys. Yeah, working. All right. I did. Okay. And is that it? Just a second. I think I did go backwards. Yeah, okay, I did. All right. So your advocate also works as an educator. Now, this part is really, really important. Um, a, a true advocate is someone that has literally life experience, has studied, has gone through, and really spent time to prepare themselves to be the most effective, right? Uh, um, I'm going to say advocate, but the most effective they can be in that role. And so um, there there's someone who's like looking and saying, okay, I know how docs and patients are when they're in a hospital setting, but I know what happens in an ED setting. And I understand what happens when you're at a clinic setting or even a clinical trial, all of those differences. And so we use advocates in all of those environments where we are facing places where decisions and things are being made regarding um, our client's health. And our other thing is um, to be able to have a conversation with, I'm going to say our warrior, because we're basically really talking about warriors, but it would be any patient, um, to talk about when things are going well, when they're not going well, what our goals are first before we start interfacing with the medical team. What does the patient want to have happen? What are their priorities? Um, what situations, what are kind of work through all the scenarios so that we can narrow it down and so that we can optimize our time between um, um, optimize the time between getting the shared goal done, right? And getting the person healthy. Um, and so when uh, the other thing is that advocates have an interesting role in that many times they are working with people who are alone, right? Um, at least so they may be an older person living with sickle who no longer have parents. They may be a single parent. They may be a young person who has just left home and is away from home for the first time in a college situation. So our goal is to set it up so that that person isn't alone, and they have a person with them that they can trust, that understands them and understands their journey. Again, a sickle journey is very different than most diseases in that you are born with it. It's genetic, and you may start having painful episodes as early as 9 months of age. So it's it's not just that the cells are sickled, but what are the ramifications of that? And so your advocate has to be very, very knowledgeable about that. Um, and so we take that knowledge, and then when we're working with docs, our nurses, or I'm going to say any care provider, they've had very little education about sickle cell. Maybe I've heard them say as much as 3 paragraphs in a book. Some people said they were really privileged because they had like a 4-hour lecture. So our job then is to be able to educate the docs, right? And the care providers um, in a way and in that they a um, understand what we're saying, B, are respectful because we're using their language. And so and in a way they can relate to, right? So they can say, okay, I can relate to this if you're reporting pain in the way they're used to hearing it. If you can use the same vocabulary that they have to use within and around safety issues. All of those things, they're already kind of tuned into. We are speaking to them as the advocate. Um, then it opens the doors more for them to be accepting of the information that we're trying to impart. So again, this whole thing of being able to communicate. Um, That's a key skill. But communication also involves a knowledge base It involves also the ability to listen, right? To be able to hear all parties. Uh, it's also body language. And so it's also verbal and written, that communication link. So again, your job, the advocate's job is not just to be there for you. The advocate's job, right, is to be as an educator. Sometimes people think of it as a translator. All right. So translating your needs to the care provider's needs to you as the patient, the solution, even across care teams, this can be needed because someone can come in and uh, from one care team, right? And they're taking over, but they aren't familiar with the patient. And so you as the advocate have to get them filled in on what's going on and where their special skill fits in. Also, where if they're wanting to do something, how that can cause harm with to the patient. For example, a lot of times you'll have people who want to come in, and if a patient has a fever, they want to put them in on these ice blankets. Well, we know that you cannot do that with a person living with sickle cell. If I'm the person who's been told to go out and get this ice blanket and bring it in and prep this bed and do these things, that's what I'm going to do, right? And that's what will happen unless there's someone there. So the advocate's job is to understand how all of this fits together and then to be able to communicate it in a way that it can be heard, right? And then again, always pointing towards what's the best care, what's the optimum care, and what is going to get patient um, better, and if they're in the hospital, out of the hospital. Okay. Okay. That's what I did wrong. So I did go backwards. All right, so this is back. Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. Sorry, guys, I went backwards. Again, so all of this, in order to do all of that, you've got to ask questions. You've got to be well informed. Okay. I think my slides are Casey. I think my slides are in kind of a loop now.
That says next.
Right. Okay. So just let me make sure. Okay.
No, that was point of care.
It's me. Okay. So sorry, it's me. It's operator error. Forgive me. Slides are doing what they're supposed to do. All right. So we've been talking about in general. So let's talk about what we really feel is important, and that is um, what is point of care advocacy. So we've given you a whole kind of overview of what the history of advocacy, those three areas mainly that that we advocate for, and how it moves things on what levels. Again, the individual, the cause, the policy. Talk to you in general about what kind of skills if you're looking for an advocate, your advocate should have those things that you should be looking for so that you have the best, I'll say, so that you can help you determine whether or not you have the right person working with you. So a lot of times what we'll see is we'll have the people who have the heart for us, right? They really love us, they really care for us, and they're going to fight for us, but maybe they don't have the skills, right? Um, and they're leading more emotionally, right? The other extreme of that is they might have knowledge, right? They might have access, but they've got no heart. And so you get this kind of displacement. So we've seen the whole gamut, and so the thing that I always say is, um, sometimes you have to sit still and really think things through, and maybe the person you really feel the heart from isn't the right person to advocate for you in certain situations. Um, and maybe that person that's not got heart, right? Maybe a lawyer kind of situation, I don't know, is a better choice. But really, we kind of think of it as being probably someone who's got training and is in the middle. All right. So um, let's talk about this point of care advocacy, because this is really, to me, I think the most, I'm going to say the key to my life of living with sickle cell disease, that it's turned out to be as positive as it has been. And when I say positive, my people, my loved ones, um, did not get cured, right? My brother was born at a time when they knew the cause for sickle. They knew the genetic cause. They understood, I guess, the pathophysiology of it. They understood about the importance of blood transfusions, all of that. And so, um, we were it was at that turning point, right, for policy and stuff, where docs actually explain things like that to parents instead of saying, go home and basically prepare to bury your child. My brother had my mother, who was always at his side and had that heart, had that fierceness, and that kind of like ability to stand up and against uh, when being treated unfairly. So when they said to her, well, my brother had a stroke at 3, he's had a stroke, he's um, physically and mentally impaired, and so you need to just take him and surrender him to a home, which is what they did then. And my mom was like, oh no, we're not doing that. He's coming home, he's going to be home with us. And she was always there. So she, within the limitations of their lifetime, I'm going to say that, um, she was really a pioneer in holding on to my brother and resisting whatever it was that the doc said and challenging them, right? Um, and so, and she used a lot of really common sense things that she just did by watching him, by being hyper vigilant, and then teaching all of the siblings to do. And so my brother lived to be 51 at a time when the average age of someone living with sickle cell was probably, I think, about 18, and that was considered a really long time. And then I think for me with my daughter, because I had had all that training from my mom and time had changed, I was able to see the difference between if somebody was there and fighting for her, that knew what to fight for and what not to fight for, that kind of thing, and had eyes on her, that we had a better experience. I also recognize that it had to do with where we live, which is in Los Angeles, which has a lot of treatment options. So people all over the country don't have that. And when I was going through it, and until I started this advocacy work, where I started to move more into causes and policy away from just an individual, I learned that things were different. But that made me understand even more why this piece of the healthcare team was so important. And so let's talk about point of care advocacy. So point of care advocacy. So we talked about general advocacy and what an advocate is, but point of care is real-time assistance in the ED, the hospital, the clinic, the treatment center, pharmacies, um, at home. It's also assistance within agencies. So if you're dealing with the Social Security insurance, with Medicare, court, education, institutions. And when we talk about that, those kinds of things, we're talking a lot about appeals and complaints. And also nowadays, because we have so much more than we ever had before, you can have a healthcare advocate at clinical trials and in transplants. Okay, so the role of an advocate is complementary to your community health worker, to your patient navigator, to your um, social worker, those kinds of roles, right? This time I am going to get it right. Okay. No, I didn't get it right. There it is. It says next on it, but it's the roly thing. Sorry, guys. So let me tell you what happened to us. We decided that we were going to take all these things that I've been talking to you about, and we were going to help people. We were helping people, and we were taking calls. And we really thought we knew what needed to do, but we hadn't documented, we hadn't come up with a system for it yet. We were just basically, we'd get a call and we would answer that call. Or we would get a call, we would answer, and either we would do it over the phone or we would go and actually to the hospital and advocate at the bedside. And so there was a group of us, and it kept growing and growing as people who had experienced us working together became part of it, and through word of mouth. And then we had a young woman who said, this work you're doing is really important, and I want to be a part of it. And so I'm going to allow you to follow me, video me, work with me, and so you can learn. And so we went on this journey with our patient Zero, and she was a female warrior, and we followed her for 2 years. And she was kind of the hallmark of what it would be the hardest case. She had family, but they were, estranged, because that's what happens in our families. People get worn out, they get tired, and they drift away, right? Young adults, they move away from home, move away from family, move away from friends. When you're moving a lot and stuff, you have problems in connecting and finding those bonds. It's difficult finding the right care once you become an adult. So Pete's pretty easy, but once you become an adult, getting care that is consistent, that is, what is Pat always has a thing with it, that is gracious, that is understanding, and convenient. It's pretty difficult, right? Again, sickle is the largest rare disease in the country, but it is rare, less than 100,000 people. Most of the hematologists went into treating cancer patients because that's really where the money was. And truthfully, many people thought sickle cell had been cured because the children were now living past that age of 18 years, right? And so we didn't then, and we still don't have enough adult care docs to give the appropriate care. But so when we meet up with patient 0. She's got a lot of health problems. And she is living somewhere where there are not a lot of options for treatment for her. She's in the situation now where the pain meds are being very, very are being monitored, and the reach of the pain epidemic has gotten into the bedside as opposed to just being something that was done against illegal drugs. So she had a lot of things against her, as well as having lived with sickle cell for over 30 years. And so we spent 2 years following her and documenting her journey, knowing that in many ways it was an extreme case. And I wouldn't call it the standard case, but we knew that we would be fighting for and in the middle of something that pretty much any kind of situation that as an advocate, point of care advocate, we would be facing, other than at this point a clinical trial. And so we spent 2 years documenting, writing, learning, teaching based on things. How much did we need to know about blood test? What did we really know about blood so we could have a conversation and be able to educate a doctor when he says, oh yeah, I know what sickle is. It's just the cells turn sickle and they block capillaries. Well, we had to learn everything. Like, so what happens when that blockage happens? It's not just pain. What is that pain a signal of? What happens when those break and you now have heme in the body? What we had to learn all of this stuff so that we were then able to educate the providers, or try to educate the providers, so that they could understand what they were making decisions on, not something that was just so simple, but was so complicated and complex. And then what were the options available? So not only were what the standard of care was, but also what are the other options? And then how do we so that was on the medical side. We had to understand how the insurance worked because she was going to different hospitals. So how does that work? What really goes on in do we see everything that they're putting in those notes, right? In our medical records, and how do we find out really what's happening there? What really were her needs? And how do you help get those needs? How do you get someone connected to a community-based organization? All of those things were all these things that we had to really, really go through, and we just documented and documented and documented. And then took what we documented and turned it into what we thought, what we ultimately used as the basis for our point of care advocacy course. So what we learned a lot. We learned that we couldn't do it all. We could not hold patient 1 emotionally and be effective point of care advocates for her, right? We had to love her and care for her and give her grace, but we also had to keep our logic hat on, right? And be able to evaluate a situation. We needed, if we were going to be able to be in that journey with her at her point of care, we could not hold her outside of that. So we needed very much to have um, to work with our community health workers because people needed more. She needed more, and it turned out the average person needed more. So things like transportation, um, homing, finding a place to live, uh, psychiatric support, right? Counselors, things like that. We could not, as an advocate, and your healthcare advocate should not be filling in those roles for you, right? Because what it takes to advocate at point of care is really this thing of being in the center, and it uses so much of how can I put it? I think it's a specialized skill set, but when you really need that, you really need 24-hour support, which we can't provide. We can provide 24-hour support if it's support at the point of care, but not what you need in order to have the things you need to have a good life at home. And so that was one of the biggest lessons. So our role as a point of healthcare provider, point of care advocate, is to also work with the community-based organizations and community health workers so that they can fill in those gaps. They can find those services. And for them, it's too hard for them to try to provide what it is that we're skilled to do. They can't be on call 24/7, they can't be navigating or advocating or negotiating with the docs and doing all the other things that they have to do to make sure that warriors are provided all the things they need to do to have a successful life outside of the hospital. It was really a hard lesson. And we also learned that we needed continuing education always because everything is changing, right? As we learn now, for example, what is the standard of care? So the standard of care when we first started this 4 years ago changed 2 years. It changed prior to the 4 years. Now with the war on drugs and everything, it's changed again. And so the the amount of services, the way we report pain, the whole idea of opioids being tracked, all of that, right, goes into how it is we are able to advocate and what it is that we know and don't know. I think that I had hoped we could have more. I'm trying to see. I don't think I'm getting any comments. Oh, hello, Diane. Okay. All right, no comments. So I had set this up so that we could have more chat, more. So let's just go with it. We we find that there are family members and community members who are advocating, and because of who they are, they want to do it all, and it tends to sort of break them. And so by breaking up these roles, right, we are all better skilled and better emotionally to provide the 24/7 year-round care that warriors need. Support. Oh, I did that. Going next. What we learned. Okay. So this was questions and discussions. And so I don't think there's a way for us to do that. So let's talk about this. Some of the questions we have asked people was, um, had they ever heard of a healthcare advocate? So I guess if you're looking at this, you have heard of a healthcare advocate, at least here. And what we've shown is that nationwide, this role, thank you, Kaya. Nationwide, this role is starting to expand. What we're seeing a lot of is, Casey, yeah, have you heard? Okay. So we were going to put your answers here. We'll just talk about it. So what we're seeing is now a divide between having the advocates. We're seeing, I won't say a divide. We are seeing where some hospitals and some situations, they're really, really welcoming healthcare advocates. Others are making it a little bit harder for you to have someone by your side. So we have to do training on the fact that you are legally under your patient rights. You are legally, you legally have the right to have a healthcare advocate by your side. They cannot tell you no to having an healthcare advocate. They can make it harder for you. They can say you have to sign something. They can try to limit access, but every patient has the right to have an advocate. You must name that advocate, right? You must say, this is Ms. Jones. She is my healthcare advocate. She has my permission to speak with you. You have my permission to speak with her. She has. So you must give verbal and sometimes signed consent in order to have that. But healthcare advocates are, again, part of your patient rights. All right. And so then, and it says, have you ever had anyone advocate for you? Now, this one's interesting because a lot of people will say, oh, I don't know. And then when they sit with it, they'll come up with times. And many of them, it was when they were in surgery, when they were, so surgery, when they were having children, so childbirth, when they were in the ED, right? So those three areas where they were really pretty much kind of really out of it, incapacitated, traditionally have said, yeah, I think somebody had to step up and help me. So at childbirth, my coach, my partner, my mom, my sister, my person was there with me while I was trying to have that baby. And that was pretty much accepted as a norm. In surgery, when someone is going into surgery, it's very common for family members and friends and others to accompany a person and sit and wait while the person is having surgery. Because of course it's a scary thing. They're going to put you under, you want to be there and make sure it turns out. And then you want to be by their side as they're coming out of the anesthesia. So that's pretty, that's pretty common. With the ED, a lot of times you're incapacitated. You can't get yourself to the ED. So it's pretty common for someone to bring you to the ED and then wait for you. And so in those areas of life, right, people think, oh, yeah, I had an advocate. Um, but not so much others, other situations. There are also times when they've said, I had an advocate, and then everybody just got tired of coming. So as a child, you pretty much, for the 80% of us as children have advocates with us, right? So that would be our parents, our guardians, siblings, all of that. And that pretty much is true up until a certain age. I would say for 80% of us, it's probably pretty much true until your mid-teens, and then it starts to kind of falter some. But the next question is, have you ever advocated for someone else? So let's think about this one. Going over what we've already talked about on on advocacy and an advocate, can you think of a time when you advocated for someone? Now, I grew up as a sibling, so I have memories. I'm sure I was advocating from the age of 8 on verbally, right, from my brother. And whether it was sitting with my mom or with the other siblings or the cousins, right, who didn't understand my brother's limitations or our limitations that were thrust upon us as siblings. For example, if it was too hot for my brother to be outside, then my mom wouldn't let any of us go outside, right? Because if he couldn't go, we couldn't go. And then the other cousins would come over and they're like, oh, you know, you can't come outside. You know how cousins are, giving us all kind of grief. And so we then had to then say, right, no, he can't come out because he's sick, right? And if he comes out, then he's gonna get dehydrated, all the things we have been taught to say. And ultimately, many of the cousins stopped, and so it got to the point where the older cousins, when the younger cousins would come along and they started advocating. So it kind of spread, that kind of thing of going from just us as the siblings to the older cousins to the younger cousins. And, I also know that many of us, so I'm just thinking of me even as a child being an advocate, right? I have met children, warriors who, even though they don't know it, and there are sometimes as young as 5 years old who are advocates for their parents. So I would say probably we've been advocates mostly for our family members, and our friends. I had many friends. People said to me, "Well, how did you have a career and um and do the things you did and be with your child?" And I mean, I had friends. I had friends who would, if I had to work, and I had to be in the office or somewhere, they would come and sit with her, and they would advocate. They would keep timing for meds. They would, make sure that she had food. They would make sure she got, at one point, they used to, this is how long ago it was, they used to have whirlpools. And so they wouldn't want to take the child and put the child in the whirlpool, right, without eyes on them. And so my friend would come and say, okay, she needs to get in the whirlpool, she needs that, and go and sit with her. So, um, And then, of course, we've all like advocated for our elders, right? When my grandmother got to the point where kidney failure, that kind of thing was looked like it, having those clinic visits where we went in would actually speak with the doc about what they saw happening, what was going to be coming down the pipeline. The other example was advocating for things like nowadays, because we're so much more knowledgeable in our community, we advocate, for someone to get into a clinical trial. We don't really realize it, but you do. The doc generally doesn't say, I have a clinical trial you might want to try. Generally now what we're finding is because of the internet and everything, and we are all of these community-based all the community-based organizations and everything bringing education to us, and Facebook pages, oh my God, spreading this information where we are actually advocating to have someone become part of a clinical trial. So I've gone through most of these. I'm going to talk about it. Yep. And here's the one that gets me. Have you ever advocated for yourself? And I'm going to say 100% you have, pretty much. Our question for this always is, when you advocate for yourself, what health condition are you in? Are you in a bed needing something done? Are you needing pain meds? Are you in pain? Are you asking for, are you calling the hospital and asking for a different doctor? Are you pleading with, and these are all situations where advocacy is important. Have you been where the EMT's picking you up and they're taking you to the wrong hospital, where you're trying to advocate to get them to take you where you need to be, where you are going to get the better health care. These are all kinds of things that we don't really think about. Are you at the pharmacist? And the pharmacist is looking and saying, well, I know I told you that we're going to have your pills today and you're supposed to get them, but then it was late. The shipment hasn't come in yet. Do you find yourselves there talking to the pharmacist about why it is you need to have your pills on time and making those phone calls, right? Or when you are in the ED and in lots of pain because that's what's driven you there, right? And you're watching the clock. And the clock is going round and round and round, and you're waiting and waiting and waiting and in pain. And so when you have to advocate for yourself, you're taking that energy, right? Your resource, which should be being used to help you feel better, to get better, right? To make something happen outside of you so that you can get that care that you need, so that you can have relief. And so this is one of the things we always say to you when you, how can I put this? When you put yourself in position where you are there alone and you have to advocate for yourself, it may be just you have to do that. But anytime you have a choice of having someone with you to help you, please, please take that one, because that's the choice, right? If you have the right person with you, that's the choice that's going to help you resolve your illness or your situation most efficiently. Okay. And then there are other times when you wish you had had an advocate. So I just want you to take a minute and think about this again. I certainly have a few of these times when I wish I had taken somebody with me somewhere. And I'll give you that example. Again, this was designed, I thought we would have more interaction. That was when I went to the Social Security office. Now, you might think Social Security office and healthcare advocate, how do those two mix? Well, so when it came time, when I got the information that my daughter should be covered under Social Security instead of my paying for, yes, Rainisha. Yeah, I hate being in the ER by myself. Absolutely. Absolutely. And even I'm going to comment on that because I just saw her saying that. I was in, before I talk about Social Security, I was in the ED with my daughter, and she was really sick. And I'm really pretty good at communicating, but we had been there, and they took her temperature, and they said her temperature she didn't have a temperature, but I could feel it. It was like her face was on fire. I mean, I could just feel it. And so I go back up, to the little glass, and I'm like, she's got a fever, and she's really sick. She's burning up. And so they were busy. I think it was a Friday night, right? And it's near West Hollywood, so there are a lot of people who'd been partying and a lot of it was a lot of people. And they're looking at us thinking, how could we look how we look and be in dire need? I know that's what they were thinking. So I went and I sat down again. And so I went back up. And I'm persuasive, so they took her temperature again, and they said, "See, she has no temperature." I said, "Something's wrong with your thermometer." And they looked at me and they said, "No, it isn't." I said, "Then you've got to have another one." And they said, "No, we don't." And I was like, "Wait a minute. You are a major hospital. How can you tell me you don't have another thermometer?" And they were like, "We don't." And all I could think of is, as the mom, you get really, I mean, truthfully, you're terrified. And I know what a high temperature means, right? So I go back and I'm holding her, and I can't help it. I'm so frustrated. I'm so scared. And then I just have these big tears. Now, it wasn't like Denzel little tear coming down. And it wasn't Viola Davis where I had the ugly cry happening, because I know there's proof that sometimes I have the ugly cry. But I was just streaming. And then I looked around, and these mothers that were in this ED all stood up, one after another, and started saying, "You need to help her." And I remember I had been in the ED, I don't know how many times. This had never happened for me. This had never been this, but I had such a sense of relief that I had other people standing up there helping me. These were strangers. These were literally, they were mothers, some of them holding babies in their hand, and I'm crying over, my teenager. And so, yeah, yeah, the ED is really a horrible place to be by yourself. The birthing center is a horrible place to be by yourself. The Social Security office, when you're trying to get work, get papers done and people to help you or make sense of it. Me, I mean, and I understand a lot, but I did not understand, and I did not understand why we kept getting denied and denied. And, finally I had to get a lawyer, and then the lawyer didn't understand, right? And so, yes, if you think about those times when you were alone and you wish you had an advocate, that should free you up to reach out and get an advocate whenever you can. Get one. It's not a sign of weakness, right? It is a sign of being prepared and a sign and a gift of, I want to say privilege, but almost privilege. It's a privilege to not be alone. You don't have to be alone in these situations. And choosing to be alone when you don't have to is depriving yourself of the opportunity to have the best outcome, right? When you have the right advocate at the right time, the whole thing is you as a team are working together, moving together to have the best outcome. And so again, I said, who do you think would benefit from having an advocate? And I really wish you would put this in the chat. Who do you think would benefit? I have what I think, but so we have Renisha in the ED. Casey, you think of when you think you could use, huh? Casey says everyone. I didn't teach her that, but everyone would benefit from it. And so there was something. Renisha agrees. Thank you, Renisha. Everyone. Yeah, everyone should have an advocate. It's really true. And there were a lot of reasons in the past, and there's even more, right? And so our next question is, where do you think you need an advocate in the ecosystem? Where do you think it is? I think Renisha knows the answer to this one too. So I've given you examples: the Social Security office, the doctor's clinic, the ED, the birthing room. There's more to this, right? The ER. And I'm even going to change this one. I'm going to say any place you are interfacing, any agency or provider that has anything to do with your health, right? Your health, your well-being, you need an advocate with you. Right. The ER and in a patient, exactly, as a patient in the hospital. Absolutely. And people think, oh, what do you mean? You're in the hospital, they should take care of you. Why would you need an advocate? And the truth is you definitely need it. And I tell people all the time, I keep hearing about the ED, and I'm like, we're not dying because of the ED. We're dying for a lot of other reasons. And a lot of those reasons are what happens on the floor. So absolutely, anywhere. And even if you're just sometimes talking about your healthcare. For example, I know Cayenne's kicked off a new program where they're actually talking to people in the criminal justice system, right? I know I've done talks with people about and intervened with mostly mothers who have sickle and their children with social services, right? About child protective services, because they need an advocate to explain to child protective services that being in a home with a parent that is medically, right, medically dependent, and I'm going to use this word, medically dependent on pain relievers, right, is not putting the child at risk. This is true. This is an actual true event where somebody reported that the mother had opioids in the house and the child was 5, and the next thing you know, social services shows up. So any place we give really these talks and our advocacy talks and everything, we're like, how do you protect yourself, right? Or how do you protect yourself? You have an illness, you have a condition. How do you protect yourself, right? In an environment, right, that can be really hostile to you and have nothing to do with you other than culturally right now. That's the way things are. And so having an advocate can help you. Having an advocate, the right advocate, right, will know, okay, I can reach out. Yes, exactly. Strength in numbers, Renisha. Good. I can reach out, right? So when we have patient 0 and we're like, they're putting you out at what time? I mean, I think they were putting her out at 1 o'clock in the morning or 11 o'clock in the evening, and then she was to get a bus and then go on that bus to another town, to another doctor, to another hospital, and they literally, really, this is true, put her out. Now, at first, I was like, nobody does this. Nurse Pat Corley, who is the nurse and has been at this many years, said, oh, yeah, that happens. I was in shock. So we as advocates are like, oh, my God. So we've got to like, thank God that, there's Uber and all those things in place now. We can't even talk about what was in place 10 years ago to get her picked up, get her driven, right? Then to the new place. Then she needed a hotel, and then to get her to the hospital, right? So talking about strength in numbers, we needed community-based organizations who had things in place to handle this. We were not. Took a heavy, heavy toll on us, but it was a really great lesson. So those partnerships are really, really beneficial. Healthcare, point of care advocates are right there, point of care, right there in that situation. We are real time. We're more like sickle cell crisis than we are chronic care, chronic pain. We're right there in the moment. And then our job is to help you get through that, and then make sure that you are connected with a community-based organization or the hospital structure or whatever is going on in your area, right, to get you the support you need. And so I'm going to just take a few minutes to talk about this. Again, I designed this to be a bit more interactive, but we may, I think, send those questions out as a survey and get some answers to it, because it would be really interesting to hear your answers to those questions. So we all know this. This is pretty much common sense and pretty much the experiences we've had in life. But, document. So why we need advocates now more than ever? So, again, naively, I thought everybody got healthcare like we got healthcare early on in my child's life. Amazing nurses, amazing. Even the people who came in to sweep the floors, they were just, everybody was so helpful and so wonderful, particularly when she was in peds. I had not had any different experiences until I started the advocacy work. Because I really got into advocacy because of gene therapy. I'd been waiting for it, I think, all my life. And when it looked like it was about to happen, I stopped my job to do gene therapy stuff, hoping that my kid could cure it. And I had no idea how horrible things were. And so thanks to Pat Corley and Dr. Riley, I was sent out to help somebody, and my eyes were then opened. Oh, please put questions or comments. Oh, thank you, Jonathan. I just saw that. I'm supposed to put the questions in the chat. So, anyway, The peds. That's right, Renisha. The peds life is true. We um we had to have some looking after in peds. You can be in the wrong hospital with peds. I don't want everybody to think I think peds is the right thing, but if you're in the wrong hospital with pediatrics, peds where they are somewhere where they don't understand sickle, you need to get out of there too, right? It's yeah. We did once where I actually had to basically take my child out of the bed, throw the IV bag over my shoulder. I don't know if I'm supposed to share this, but I will, and leave the hospital because they did not know. This was many years ago. And the guard came after me. And he's like, "Little girl, what are you doing?" I think they thought I was stealing or something. So I was like, "I'm not a little girl, and this is my kid, and she's dying." And that's how I learned you could sign people out, but I didn't know. They don't teach you that, right? That you can sign out anyway. Eventually, they bought me the papers and we left. But yes, mostly the peds life is great. So why do we need advocates now more than ever? And so the first thing I'm going to say to you is the rising cost of healthcare. And so healthcare cost is driven by a lot of things. I mean, people always like when they talk about the cost of meds, they always want to say it's the pharma companies, but it's not. There is a lot of drivers. So what happened with healthcare was um, they it used to be that many hospitals were run by charities and municipalities. And then in the 60s, there was a big push for privatized hospitals and um, companies like Kaiser, right? HMOs. So they came in and they pitched deregulation and and um, and these huge things that had hospitals where basically they took care of everything and presented it as cost cutting. And so that got a lot of the municipalities and eventually gobbled up a lot of the more independent hospitals. It also reduced uh, many of the, I'm going to say, protections. And so hospitals then became to the point where they had to answer to boards, right? And they had I'm sorry, I forget what they're called now, but basically the people who have stock and all of that, right? So that they could have profit. And so the whole thing, everything, of course, costs more now. Everything costs more. It's inflation, this. And so what they did was they started looking at how they divide labor. They looked at who does what. They just really peered in and started sharing cost down so that they could have a higher profit, right? Um, there are things. So they then take things and they do things. If you ever looked at a hospital bill, and my shock was when I saw I paid $4 for Tylenol, and that was because they had factored in the overhead of of her being in the hospital into the price of a Tylenol. So okay, that's one thing. Hospital culture. So at one point, hospitals and docs were more like you could come in and they did diagnosis and they spent time and the whole thing, the idea was you were healing, more of a healing thing. That's now shifted and you're really truly more of really just dealing with whatever the acute situation is. So you broke your hip, right? And so you broke your hip. You go in, they do x-rays, they say you broke your hip. They will put you in the hospital, give you some pain relievers, adjust you, give you some time to start mending, and then they push you out. It used to be that in hospitals, you had a recovery time. You had access to different types of therapies really in the hospital. And all of those things were then, in order to address the raising costs, a lot of those things became things that were done outside of the hospital in specialized centers. Um, the understaffing now of providers. Now, it costs a whole lot of money to go to medical school. Many people before who became doctors wanted to be healers, right? Not repairers, right? And so much of the power that you had as a doctor now, because of the way things are structured, uh, keeps people from really wanting to go and be providers. That, and of course, the cost of medical school. The whole thing. So they just finished an article, and I'll see if we can attach it, where they talked about the use of nurse practitioners. I spoke to a nurse practitioner 2 weeks ago, who was working as the hospitalist. So she was the hospitalist, and not only that, did she have responsibility for everybody in a bed in that hospital overnight, but she also had responsibility for the people in the ICU. So you think about that. Nurse practitioners are wonderful. We're really using them a lot in sickle and trying to get them better trained and more training. But could you imagine being a nurse practitioner, being in charge of a hospital? And not only that, but the ICU. Again, it is the understaffing, so they save money, but also there are fewer and fewer docs. We have the DEA and the war on drugs. So this is my pet peeve. So initially, um, in the 80s, after the AIDS epidemic, the um, um, it kind of spearheaded the leaps and bounds into cancer care. But also there was that pain component, right? So um, AIDS was very painful, and it did have a cancer component in it. And then the cancer doctors had learned so much, and also a lot about pain. And there was a big movement to relieve pain that started in the 80s and 90s, and was also part of the patient's rights. We also had um, many of the soldiers who had come back from many deployments from the Middle East. It used to be, if you were a soldier and you're in the soldier, being a soldier in war, and you get shot somewhere, you get to come home. Uh, and during this time, the treatment protocols, the technology, everything had improved so much that vets could be um, treated and then put back into action. And as a result of this, they came home with chronic pain, and so that was also part of the pain movement. And so it was not decided. I guess it was decided as part of all of that. Again, back to advocacy, right? A cause, relieving pain, to policy, and it moved right through there that patients were entitled to pain relief. And so at that point in time, many of what they treated pain was with opioids, right? That's what they had. Drug companies came in. Oh, Rainisha. I'm sorry. Okay. When my sister was just ranting about the war and drugs last night, because I don't get what I used to get. That's right. So sorry. So Renisha is commenting, yeah, this is her reality. And it is the war on drugs that's preventing you from getting, oh, that's so cool. Sorry. Getting what you used to get in the hospital. And that was never the deal, the reason for that. So what happened was Yes, advocacy is needed in schools. Also, yes, the pharmacy, and most people don't know about sickle cell. That's right. Absolutely. Um, anyway, so the pain thing is happening. Pharmaceuticals look and go, oh, look, there you pain. Pain is big. We are going to we can do something for pain. And so they started to manufacture pain treatments because they could make money and it was a big, big market for it. Um, and so they started manufacturing what are they called, Casey? What artificial, yeah, artificial opioids. Synthetic, no, I'm sorry, synthetic opioids. Now, opioids work really well. They have for thousands and thousands of years. Yes, there are people who are hooked on opioids. Yes, I guess you can overdose on opioids, but there is very little fact or history of people who are being treated with opioids for legitimate illnesses doing any of those things. Okay. Um, but what happened was the pharmaceutical companies started manufacturing them and using them. And then we had the whole case on Oxycontin where the clinical trials were not done correctly and just really one bad actor. Yeah, really one bad actor, which caused a lot of people not in the hospitals, not in legitimate clinics, right? Not in legitimate ERs, but bad actors who overprescribed, overused, and then saturated areas um, with Oxycontin. So the head of the DEA had a not the DEA, I'm sorry, the CDC had a son who was having a problem with opioids. And he went to his dad and said, Dad, I'm having a problem with opioids, with Oxy, and so are my friends. And so he said, I'm head of the CDC. Let me see what I can do. This is a true story. So he and puts out a thing and they do a report. This report was really based on pill mills, and really these bad actors. And it came up with recommendations, and it had 3 conditions which were exempt, right, from the recommendations of the report. It was sickle cell, end of life, and cancer, right? And so through this report, those 3 conditions are mentioned in several places, but sickle was mentioned, I think, only in a third of those places, right? And he pushed the report out. So it started there. That's how it all started with with this report. And it just blew up, right? Suddenly there were DEA agents in EDs. True story. One showed me his gun. I mean, it was just crazy. And we're like, you're not supposed to be here, but they did. And other formulas for pain relievers were being made. So we had that happen. And then we had the whole thing now of these formulas, which can be made in people's kitchens. I mean, it's pretty easy to get these formulas and things now. Much of it coming out of other countries into our countries. Again, being sold on the streets and being in the streets, but have somehow now caused a reaction, not a reaction, a how can I put it? As an extension of this war on drugs, they have created this database which tracks opioid prescriptions. And one of the reasons they did it here with prescriptions is because once they closed down all of the pill mills and the really bad doctors, because they're pretty easy to find, it was hard to find them. They had this whole like concentration right on it. So they could not really go after doctors. What they did was they put the pharmacists in their eyesight and said, "Pharmacist, it's your fault that this happened, and so we're going to put restrictions on you and what you're doing, and it's going to be your job to watch over opioids." And so that's how we ended up with the national database on opioid prescriptions, and all that was funded through the federal government and the DEA. And none of it was supposed to end up at the bedside. The docs don't know what to do. Nobody knows what to do, but that's what we're fighting now. So, yeah. Yes, Renisha's right. She says I knew that was one of the reasons this happened. Yeah, opioid abuse is nothing new. It just finally landed on the doorstep of someone in Congress. Yeah, it was the CDC, and he really did. He apologized to me. Because I told him, I said, we had this conversation. I said, your report's killing my people. What are you doing? And he said, that's not at all what we wanted to do. And he really did do another report that said, this is the report on the misuse of the opioid misuse, right, report. And again, stated over and over again that sickle. I think also part of what's happening there is we have a lot of new thoughts on pain and in sickle, and the whole thing about chronic pain versus acute pain. So nobody really can have a solid argument against using opioids for acute pain. But they do talk about it a lot about chronic pain. And we have a lot of adults who, like since they were 2 years old, like my kid, who have been on opioids for initially for only for acute, for crisis. But as the damage built up, then of course, then she was being given opioids for chronic pain. And so now they're in this dilemma. They have adults who have lived and are in a lot of pain and have higher tolerances for opioids. And they're saying, oh, well, we think it's the chronic pain, but you can have acute pain and a chronic pain together, which is one of the things we really go deeply into. And so I think really the dilemma is what do we do for the people who have been using the opioids to address their pain for many, many years versus setting guidelines for people who are young, right? Newborns up to 5. How are we going to just treat their chronic pain and let providers determine what to do for older people? I don't know. I don't know. I'm not a doctor, but it seems to me that seems to be the dilemma that the older sickle doctors are having these conversations. And we are suffering as a community. And so that's why we need advocates, because we can explain that in ways that the person who's there at the point of treatment doesn't understand the history. They are really caught because if they go and they put in a higher dosage, they get flagged in the system and the pharmacy gets flagged, and then they have to write everything up, and it's just really hard for them. And so we have to go, remember, from individual to cause to policy. That's one of the things that we have to work on. And we have to work with the pain community because it's just not ours. It's just harder on our community because very few people get started on opioids that young and manage to live 40, 50 years. And so, okay, and the other now is the rollback of patient civil and ADA rights. We don't know what's going to happen. Again, this is the first time we've had a change in government. The head of government that could have such an effect on actual rights, right? And things that we as a people have come to count on and see, think at all times we had states did what they wanted, but we had federal rights which could override those. And we are, for the first time, I want to say in jeopardy, but in jeopardy. So this is a period of time where we're looking at everything. So we don't know what's going on. And so, um, and then attacks on social programs, because a part of this new thing is cost cutting and philosophy, at least that's been shown up to this point from these groups, is that they are not great fans of social programs, so we don't know. So you must have an advocate with you. You must have someone with you to help fill in these gaps and look over you. And I'm going to say not just with sickle. I'm saying anybody you love, you care, you know about, do not let them go to the hospital by themselves. We saw a lot of things happening during the uh, during COVID, where a lot of our people were mistreated. A lot of our people were not given the proper meds. A lot of them were told, "Oh, sign DNRs." All of this was going on, right, because of this great crisis and overrun of the medical system. And that's really never corrected itself. So having an advocate there to kind of help shore up and have another set of eyes, and it's not just a person, but someone who knows um, on what is going on, will help to better our odds of having a positive outcome. And that's really all we want. I mean, we're blessed to be in this country. We're blessed to have hospitals. I'm the first one to say that. I've been in hospitals in other countries, and some of them, yes, are cheaper, but the amount of options and things like that that we have here are really great. The reason our people with sickle cell live as long as they do is because we live here, and that's great. So I'm not saying it's a downfall of America. I'm just saying that that's what's going on now, and so we do have to be prepared for it. And then I'm going back to, okay, so is it, I'm going to kill her name, Arimua? Yeah. So yeah, advocacy is needed in schools, also pharmacies. Most people still don't know about sickle cell. Absolutely. Remember, there are millions of people in the world born with sickle cell. In America, only 100,000 of us. Renicia's. I think that's it. If I click it, does it show up? Okay. Renisha, yeah, we are praying for the doctors to write the scripts. For the scripts, just to get paid. Oh, not to mention we are paying for doctors. Oh, okay. Well, all right. I don't know about the doctors just to get the script. Yes. So they have divided up. When we talked about, remember the specialties? We used to have therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists who treated your whole mental thing at the your mental well-being. Again, that whole idea of being a healer. And that's been divided up. So now you might go to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist's job is simply to give you a diagnosis and write you a script. 15 minutes. 15 minutes. That's it. Right? And then you might get a counselor or a social worker, but you don't have that overall. They are not working together as a team. And again, so it's back to that whole thing of specialties. And so, yes, and you'll have pain management. So you'll go and you'll talk to pain management, and they might write you scripts. But again, it's not a team effort thing where everybody is working together towards getting you to an optimal state of health. And that's really what we want. We want an optimal state, right? And we want to maintain that as long as we can. Okay. Renisha said, I knew one of the reasons happened. Yeah. Yep. Okay. Right. So Renisha said, yeah, many of the doctors. So she said she saw it coming, her pain management coming. Here it is. I think you can see it when I do that right. Okay, I did it right. Thank you. Yeah, the docs really tried to fight it. And many of the older docs, I mean, like we've had the same doctor for 30 years and he's freaking tired. He's tired. He did not become a doctor. He was very high powered. He's not used to little screens telling him how many pills he can affect. He's not. And he's made enough money where he's just ready to go home. The younger docs, not so much. And so it's really going to have to take us getting together with the pain community, right? I think with the pain community and taking it again, get that cause, pick up the cause and then try to move the policy. Because the way it is now, the policy, there's some policy and we're watching it now and you'll hear more from it at the federal level that we're looking at. And so we'll be asking Cayenne, we'll partner with Cayenne and the other CBOs to try to get, to get word out so that we can organize and address some of this. But exactly, that's what's happening to us. The docs are tired. We're tired. People in pain are tired of being in pain. And being in pain when it can be relieved is tantamount to torture, right? And so I feel like the whole system, docs are freaked out because they're docs and can't do what they used to do. And people are freaked out because they can't get the care, right? So on a positive note, we can make a difference. We have made a difference. Education, partnership, and patience, advocacy from the individual to the cause to the policy. And I think that's it for me. Oh, am I done?
And it says so true.
Yeah. I have so one clock says 2 minutes. I've done 2 hours. The other one says we have 8 minutes left. Should I try to figure out
You do have 8 minutes left.
should I try to figure out how to get the questions in the No, I can't. Oh, okay. I was going to try to see if I could figure out how to get the questions into the thing, but I can put them on screen. And if people could see them. Nope.
Yes, ma'am. That will work. You can put them on the
Okay.
screen.
Okay, let's see. I'm doing this. Let's see. Here, go back. Okay, so let's just go back to these. Okay. I think that's the other one. All right, so I think we did. If you can, in the comment section, just answer yes or no on this. Let's try those. Yes or no. All right. Have you heard of a healthcare advocate? Yes or no? So I know Renisha and Adenomic. Perfect. Yeah. 2 minutes. Yes. Oh, hi, Calvin A. Hi, sweetie. Okay. All right. The next question. Have you ever had anyone advocate for you? So I can even answer these. Yes. Come on. Just. Okay. Very good. Yes. All right. Q&A's on it. Muiwa. Oh, hi, Muiwa. Okay. Next. Have you ever advocated for someone? And if so, who? Okay. Oh, sorry, typo. My. Casey. Casey. I need help. I can't find it. Anybody else? Myself. Yes. My kids, sister, cousin. Yes. Strangers. That is interesting because that does happen. Sometimes you'll find yourself in position when you won't even know the person or you're helping them. Okay, so how do I get to the next one? Oh, I just need the next one. Have you ever advocated for yourself?
Stop touching this. Arrows.
Okay, sorry. Renisha. Yes, many people. We like that. Many people. Yes. And I think this one, have you ever advocated for yourself? I think we all say yes to that one. Whether it's every caregiver's, that's true. Every caregiver's dilemma. Yep. Many times. Yeah. Manisha, yes. All the time. And I think we have to, one of the things that I also try to do in putting things in context is that up until I'm going to say mid 70s, hey, that's pretty good rate, 50%. People never challenge their caregivers. Again, I've asked I asked the women in my family of them, like how old were you when you went into menopause? And they all looked at me. I swear to you, all of them. And they were like, I don't know. I had a hysterectomy. I said, you had a hysterectomy? And they're like, yeah. It's like, when? I did not have a female in my family in the previous generation that had a natural menopause, and all of them had hysterectomies before they were 30. And not one of them was diagnosed with cancer or anything. And you know what they said to me when I said why? They said, because the doctor told me to. So this whole thing of having a voice in your healthcare is fairly new, right? It's fairly new, but it's so needed. And have you ever had times when you wished you have an advocate? I'm gonna answer that one too. As a yes. I think there are many times. But I hope that going forward, we have fewer of these situations, that we 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 move forward with the idea that having a point of care advocate or an advocate with us is a time of being, it's just part of being prepared. It's like when you pack your go bag, right? We all have that go bag because we don't know when we're going to have to go to the hospital. And, I always had some change when you use change. I'll never forget mine. I always had like crackers, water, music, blanket, my phone, always. So that go bag, think of it when you are going to the hospital, when you are going for treatment, when you're going to things. Oh God, that's right, Calvin A. I think I always challenge my doctor so much I get on their nerve. Exactly. So again, having an advocate there can get another, they can then be like, get on the doc's nerves with you, right? Do you think you would benefit from having an advocate? We know I said yes. And again, you can have a point of care advocate. I think in many ways your community health worker is an advocate, another role. Um, you can have several advocates. Um, not one advocate can be your advocate for everything, right? So again, um, so again, we do training for health point of care advocacy. We advocate at the legislative level. We advocate, um, at all of those levels. But, and I think the other thing is by having someone who says, I'm going to training, I'm going to be a point of care advocate, you are relieved of the burden. I'm really going to say the burden or the guilt of thinking that you are burdening a family member or someone, right? You have someone who has committed to this work and wants to help you. And families get tired. You've heard me say I come from a tribe. God, somebody breaks a finger at a baseball game and you look and the ED is filled with brown people with curly hair looking like me. Seriously. But they have not been to the hospital to see my kid in the last 30 years. And they all have their reasons. I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying that that's a fact. So families, friends, they can waste away. They're busy. But if you have advocates who say, I'm committed to this work and it's a fit between the two of you, because sometimes it might not be a fit. Sometimes it is a fit. Again, we push advocating in teams, so we have less of personality things happening. Um, and because you don't want any of that when it comes to point of care, if you can mitigate it. But yeah, I think everybody would benefit. Okay, see, I can't. And an advocate will be helpful everywhere. I saw somebody mention school. There was another one. The pharmacy, the ED, on the hospital floor. I'm going to say it again, clinical trials, surgery, pregnancy, court, any place where you have to, even sometimes with your work, because even if you have these protections at your work, it can help if you have an advocate who is there and can talk to you, to your HR department about really what it is, because it is a very rare disease. And 9 times out of 10, they're going to look at you and say, oh, but you don't look sick, and that's kind of the way it is. Your cells are regenerating really fast, and you know genetically we are how we are, and most people have a vision of what sick looks like, and until a person with sickle cell gets really really sick, most of the time they don't look sick in those traditional ways. Okay. And this is why. So I think I'm done. If you have any questions or comments, you can always write Cayenne. They'll send them to me, or you can write me, Adrian, at Axis, AXIS, ADVICOCAY.com, .org. And most of you have my phone number anyway. So, okay. I think we're done.
Yes, ma'am, we are done.
All right.
If anybody else has any more questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'll give y'all a few more moments, but thank you guys so much for joining us for this amazing session with the one and only Miss Adrian Shapiro. When is the classes coming back? Somebody's asking.
We're thinking mid. What did we think? We're thinking April. We're getting end of April. Oh, wait a minute. When I'm traveling. Yeah, April.
When did you want to go?
Yeah. We're April. We're thinking April. Classes
All
will
right,
be
she
back in
said
April.
classes will be back in April. You heard it. And another person is saying thank you so much to Cayenne and Access to Advocacy for today.
We want to say thank you guys for joining us. I know it is a Saturday, and I know how committed our community is, because our classes are, Sundays and Wednesdays, and 2 hours is a big a big commitment. So thank you so much.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to let you have your Saturday. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Bye. Thank you.